here to continue the conversation, but from a very different perspective about responsible AI and social impact. I am delighted to have with us JoAnn Stonier, who is now Mastercard Fellow, but of course well known to this room, I'm sure, as most recently you were the Executive VP Chief Data Officer for Mastercard, responsible for Mastercard's data strategy globally. You've got a stellar biography, which I'm sure everybody else can find. And Lauren Woodman, who is the Chief Executive Officer of DataKind, and most recently also CEO of NetHope. So we've got the right people here to talk about it. So we're going to start by doing something we haven't been doing that much in this conversation, which we want to understand from both of you. What specifically, give us a little bit of background, each of you, on the work you are doing now and how it relates to responsible AI. And I'll start, I'll start with you, Lauren.
Okay. I'll be happy to start. Thank you for the question. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today. So DataKind, just for a little bit of context setting, DataKind is a nonprofit that for over 10 years has been working in this space, primarily working with social impact organizations to develop data science and AI-based solutions for greater impact. So that puts us very squarely in the, okay, how do you do that ethically? How do you do that in an equitable way? And we take the approach of, maybe looking at the technology very much as a tool. Let's start with the question. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? And then once we do that, how do we actually center people at the middle of that? What are we trying to do for the people and the communities that we serve? And that's given us some experience of places where we've done it well, frankly, and some places where we've probably learned some things along the way. And that's come together in some of the work that JoAnn and I've been doing together and really thinking deeply about data equity with a white paper that'll come out next week. But, really starting to think about how do we, in the world of generative AI, start to embed that learning and that practical experience into some things that can help guide us and have a constructive conversation moving forward.
Can you give us a couple of examples before we go on?
In terms of solutions that we've done? Sure. We did one that we did with John Jay College here that we've been talking a lot about this week to help them raise their graduation rates from 54% to 86% over the course of 3 years, and doing that through identifying students that may be at risk. We're doing a lot of work with Mastercard actually, and starting to think about how do you identify places for climate financing that will have real impact. Doing places, and how do we work with community development funds to make sure that those solutions are appropriate to the diverse communities that they serve, and we're meeting those needs in very good ways.
Yeah, great, excellent, thank you.
Sure. Hi, thanks for the introduction. So I guess my work has really evolved over time. I was, as you mentioned, the Chief Data Officer, but before that I was the Chief Privacy Officer. And I think our work at Mastercard has always been centered on, even though we're really a B2B company, we're a B2B2C brand, and much of our work is very individually impactful. And so our approach around data has always been a very responsible approach, and one that we always are designing with the individual in mind. And so now as a Mastercard Fellow, I have the opportunity to work with external organizations, which was always part of my responsibility, but now I get to focus on that and work with organizations like the World Economic Forum, the OECD, the United Nations, on how do we further our activities, as well as understand what are the new technologies like artificial intelligence, generative AI, and what are the impact on responsible data practices, and how do we really begin to think about what are the tools, what are the techniques, and how do we really make it both interoperable and within the right context? And so getting to be really focused on that work, doing work that Lauren and I are doing with the World Economic Forum on data equity, as well as heading up now the policy committee for the US ICB, things like that, to kind of further connect communities into these important issues.
And what are the early priorities that are coming out of that work?
Well, we're going to talk about that. So, Lauren, you want to start about data equity, or should I?
Go ahead.
So the Data Equity Council is going to be a long-running council for the World Economic Forum, given its importance in trying to define exactly what does data equity mean. And so Lauren mentioned that our first white paper will be published early next week. It's in its final throes of editorial review right now. We both probably have that in our inbox to give its final blessing. But the idea of data equity, given especially the world of AI and generative AI, is that, generative AI, and we've heard today the importance of data over and over again. We really have inequitable data in this world that we're using to develop all of our technology. It does not reflect everyone on this globe. And I think Mastercard's Center for Inclusive Growth knows that. And we have known that at Mastercard for quite some time as we've developed our products and solutions, that we really have to make sure we understand data's flat sides. And so we've begun this council to begin to talk about, well, what are the tools, the techniques, the principles that have to be looked at? And the paper that we're publishing really starts with the foundation models and how they've learned. And so, much of the technology's been, we just heard from Google DeepMind that, the private sector's leading here. And so we have to really think about, how are we creating the methodology? How are we thinking through the data that we are teaching the models on? How are we looking at the applications that'll probably be global, but we've probably taught it on a lot of North American biased thinking. A lot of data is mostly westernized data, right? It's not global data. So the learnings and the observations are going to be slightly slanted. Now we can adjust for that, but we have to really think about that. So these are some of the things. And we're looking at the whole information lifecycle and thinking through, well, what should we all start thinking about so that equitable use of data in all of its outcomes can really be thought through.
I think one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about is, we've had a lot of conversations about ethics, over the years, and everybody's got ethical AI frameworks, and those are very useful in advancing the conversation. But ethics are also, they are unique to communities, they're unique to companies, they're unique to the situation, and all those things. Equity is something that we can look at and, I don't want to say objectively measure, but you can certainly start to pull back the covers and say, this data is not representative. This data does not have the disaggregation that we need. This data is not telling us the full story. And so how do we start to develop a vocabulary that we can share around thinking about those different points so that we can start to develop robust conversations about how do we actually intervene at these various places? What are the questions that we should be asking in this conversation around transparency and accountability? How are we making sure that those elements are being disclosed as we're having those conversations? Because, to Dorothy's point a few minutes ago and many conversations earlier today, trust is going to be really important. And if we don't have those things and we don't have a framework and we don't have a vocabulary, we won't have a basis around which to start to develop that trust.
Trust, go ahead.
Well, and on top of that, we'll wind up with inaccurate results, right? And we even heard earlier from Vint and Robert, right, that, if we're not going to have the right data for all of our solutioning, we're going to wind up with the wrong outputs and outcomes. And that will only get amplified very quickly in this environment.
How has, I think inarguably since for the last year, generative AI is sort of just all anybody can talk about it, and it's been both sort of a gold rush and an arms race at the same time, and sort of drowned out in many other conversations about AI, at least in my opinion anyway. So how you both sort of touched on generative AI. How does this generative AI, this pervasive discussion and developments in generative AI change the way you've been both in this game for a long time? Think about how this changes your work with social impact. What are both the opportunities and the risk there?
Well, I think that from an opportunities perspective, I mean, the advances that we've seen in the technology open up, pardon me, all sorts of new, ways for us to think about it. I mean, Lance spoke about earlier this morning of, thinking about how do we unlock some of the data that's sitting in some of the data that we've collected over the years. We've started to do some of that work, and it's very promising. And the idea that the barriers that we've had around understanding which interventions have been impactful in the past and learning from that's been a real barrier. If we can flip that, well, that's super interesting, right? That's a real opportunity for us to actually concretely learn from past experience and not anecdotally. But of course, there are risks. I mean, anytime you're seeing something that is distributing broadly and is not well understood by everyone, and we know many of these risks. I think one of the things that we've been struggling with is, a lot of the risks and the thinking that has developed up until now has been for more traditional approaches. Now we call everything AI. If you called yourself a data scientist last week, you're no longer a data scientist. You are, you do AI.
Just throw AI in.
Right. It's just, but it's become the shorthand for everything that we're talking about. But the models are different, the risks are different, and so we really have to start thinking about that. And I think part of what we've been trying to parse apart is, where is it different? How is it different?
Yeah.
And therefore, how do you have those concrete conversations in a way that will inform the work that needs to happen?
Yeah, and I also think that we're at a real interesting inflection point, though, because I also think the opportunity to solve some things is, incrementally easier, right? If we deploy generative AI in the right ways. And so, I've had the good fortune of having several different conversations this week where I think we're on the cusp of solving some problems that have been really difficult, whether it's in climate or in particular health, right? I think generative AI is going to help us with healthcare solutions very, very quickly in areas where we weren't able to get at the data, get at the information. And so I think we're going to see solutions develop faster, which are going to solve some of our problems quicker. Again, as long as we have the accuracy, we have the right data, and we're doing all of our homework, I do think we're going to start seeing some amazing solutions.
Those are some big contingencies. But yes, we only have just a couple of minutes left. So just quickly, if I could ask each of you to address, really for everybody in the room or anybody that's going to be watching this panel, given that AI is going to just, the rate of change is going to just continue to accelerate. For professionals, whether they are in companies, civil society, social impact, what do they need to be doing, and how do they need to be adjusting to this moment of rapid change to sort of drive their goals?
So I think we have a tendency to trust our outputs really from any kind of technology, really almost too much. And I think at this point, we need to be querying those outputs and addressing output to outcome. And what do I mean by that? We've heard everybody today talk about contextualization. And what that really means for me is that, what are we trying to achieve? We keep talking about that. The output from AI or generative AI needs to be scrutinized for what you're trying to achieve. And we are the humans that only the humans, I think, can make those decisions and look and scrutinize the output from the models, from the methodology, to the outcomes we're trying to achieve. And it's in those steps in between the output and the outcome, I think all of us play a role, whether we're a technologist, a data scientist, an algorithmist, an AI expert, or I love the idea of a social scientist that came up today. So a social scientist, whether you're a lawyer, privacy expert, a data security expert, or just product development, anyone in civil society, I think all of us have to really look at that. That's the moment for me where I think we all have to play very deeply.
Excellent. And Lauren, we'll give you the final word.
Thank you. That's very scary. That's the most terrifying thing I've heard all day. So there's a couple of things. A big plus one to that comment, because I do think the contextualization is absolutely critical. I think that the rate of change that we're seeing, it is so rapid. I think in another 15 or 20 years, we're going to look back at this period of time and we're going to name it, right? Like, it's going to have a name, and we're going to say these are the years of whatever. And I think for all of us in this room and people that are working in this space, the thing that I don't want us to lose as we get excited about what that name will be and how we will talk about these years is, what were we doing to advance progress in ways that matter to the communities that we care about? And when all of us look around and you start doing those circles, that's the world. We all share this world. And remembering that at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is to use technology for social impact. That is the piece I think that, I keep coming back to. What is the problem? For whom? How are we going to do it? And then how are we going to scale it?
Excellent. And we'll be, later today, we'll be having a contest for who can come up with the best naming convention for this era. So stand by for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.